What's going on, everybody? Mortem here, this time bringing you a launch review for Tainted Grail, The Fall of Avalon, an early access title I've been following for quite some time that takes place in a world of Arthurian legend with a very dark and gritty sort of occult take, even though it throws in some interesting humor here and there. But before we dive fully into that, this is normally where I would give my usual spiel, but as you probably noticed from the title, this is obviously not a 100% review. And what's more, this game launches into its 1.0 version tomorrow from the day of this video, which means, of course, that I received a review copy from the game's publisher, Awaken Realms, but that was back on the 16th, and that frankly just wasn't enough time to actually get it 100% in combination with a few other things I had to do in the meantime in my personal life. So this video is obviously just going to be a launch review to go over the things that I think are especially important to know ahead of the game's 1.0 release, and then the 100% review will just have to happen a little bit later, as is sometimes the case. Hopefully that won't take too long. I'm down to just a couple more things I need to sort of figure out and parse my way through, but honestly telling you about the specifics of that would just be straight up spoilers. So to keep it simple, there's a couple quest lines I haven't managed to find yet, and then I'm pretty sure there's an ending I'm missing as well. Now, what's more, in addition to the review access provided a little bit early, they did also send me a collector's edition of this game as a press mailer, and that was largely because I've been covering the game since it launched into early access all the way back in 2023. But from there, let's actually talk a bit more about the game specifically. So, I would say, having played through the full version of Tainted Grail, I have actually done a full complete playthrough. I'm in the middle of a second one, actually. I would say that it pretty much confirmed what I suspected ahead of time. In a recent video, I forget exactly which one, I mentioned that because of the nature of its early access period giving us the first two acts to explore and even test some, I figured the first act would probably be very polished in comparison to the later acts because that's what spent the most time in early access getting all of the feedback, and that the back half would likely be obviously less polished but also buggy because it hasn't seen the same level of testing, and that proved to be correct from my experience here. The game is divided up into three zones: Horns of the South, Kuanacht, and then Forlorn Swords. The first two areas got testing. Horns of the South has been the primary thing they've tested throughout early access, and as a result, the content there, it all kind of works. I ran into basically zero problems, but when you start getting towards the end of the second act and into the third act is when I started to notice a lot of side quests breaking. Now, none of this transferred to the sort of main story. That has a pretty free-form approach. You can pretty much always complete the main objective of an area even without engaging in the quest that tends to associate with it. And it looks like they've really done a good job of parsing their way through that because I actually couldn't find a way to break the main quest. Some of the side quests, though, were very hit or miss. Luckily, it doesn't look like any of the major side quests broke, but there were quite a few small ones that ultimately didn't matter too much, to be fair, but they did break, and for whatever reason they were bugged and I could not complete them. That, I would say, was the biggest thing by far, but there were some other issues. Audio kept cutting out when characters were talking in the later areas, and what's more, this game was actually made in Unity, which comes with some problems that are unique to the Unity game engine, and this is the fact that over time your save file tends to get really bloated, and this can cause just the time it takes to save on top of loading times to balloon a little bit. So while it starts off really quick and snappy when you begin a playthrough, by the time you get to that final area, even just the game's autosaves will noticeably slow the game down for a few seconds. And a problem with Unity in general is that if you play that game for extended periods of time with that engine, it tends to eventually run into an almost sort of memory leak situation where the game starts running very, very slowly, and the only real way to fix that is to just restart it. And so I wanted to mention all of that stuff straight away. The game is not irretrievably broken or anything, but it does have some substantial technical issues in the back half of the game. But that was also the exact same scenario for Baldur's Gate 3 and even Larian's other work, Divinity Original Sin 2. They also have a very similar approach where they early access the first portion of their games, get them really fine-tuned, but then come launch day, the last act is significantly less polished, and that's basically what happens here. So I suppose we'll see how it pans out, but that was my experience with this. Now, come a day one patch, however, it might be slightly improved, I suppose, but we'll certainly see. Moving on from there, the game does feature a few different difficulty modes. Easy, normal, hard by default. Both easy and hard actually have an additional modifier as well. If you're on easy, you can turn on the story focus mode, which makes the game very difficult to lose at all, as they give you a gigantic damage buff and you take almost no damage. And then on the other side of that, on the hard mode, you can also turn on survival mode, and you'll need to eat, sleep, and you can only save in beds. Now, this game does also feature a character creation. The character creator is a little basic, it's pretty much cosmetic, but you will be able to customize the look of your character. If you are unaware and you missed some of the more recent updates, the game will feature both first and third person. You will be able to see the character you make if you so choose, but it's worth a mention that this game was designed with first person in mind first. Now, immediately following your cosmetic character creation, you'll answer a couple of questions while you yourself are in prison, and this will give you an initial bonus to some of the skills depending on your answers. These are not huge buffs or anything. You can easily outlevel these, so pick what you want, but it's also not the end of the world. Most of the progression and character development happens much later, though. For now, let's talk a little bit about the story. Obviously, we are ahead of the game's actual release. I don't want to spoil anything, so I'm not really going to cover much besides what is actually available in the early access period right now, and even then, not even most of that. In fact, most of what I want to cover is simply what you learn in the prologue. Basically, our hero here has contracted the Red Death, which is why we are in this prison complex when we start the prologue. The Red Priests have been dragging people from Avalon who have contracted the Red Death, a mysterious plague that is sweeping the land and killing absolutely everyone, to the island asylum. Here, the Red Priests do basically unspeakable horrors trying to figure this disease out and find a way to stop it. We don't have to languish in prison for very long, though, because we are immediately freed by a character named Caradoc. Caradoc is here to facilitate our escape, which is where you will then get to grips with the game's systems as you move through the prison. Eventually, though, you'll find yourself in a place that is very different from the rest, where you will encounter a fragment of a soul. And shortly after this, you learn pretty quick that this fragment of a soul you're after is none other than King Arthur, which if you've watched any of the promo material, or again, just played through the prologue already, you would know. In the 600 years since King Arthur initially came to Avalon, established Camelot and all that, things have obviously fallen into incredible disrepair, and so people are trying to bring King Arthur back so he can come and settle all of their problems. And then the rest of the game is really all about how you facilitate all of the decisions that go with that. The game has a multitude of endings, choice and consequence, the whole 9 yards. Each zone has a central struggle that you'll get involved in, or choose not to get involved in. As I mentioned, you can largely ignore those central conflicts of each region and find a sort of alternative option to get the main quest objective you actually need done. And then all of that culminates in one of many different endings. Now, there's a handful of sort of primary endings, and then a bunch of variations to those based on the decisions you made along the way. All in all, I liked the narrative quite a bit. I really appreciated how they really tried to, again, allow you some freedom in how you wanted to approach any given situation, and while you do have to live with the consequences, you are otherwise free to deal with it how you please. Now, for the sake of this video, that's really all I want to say on that, so from there, let's talk progression systems a little bit. So, progression is interesting in the sense that its main progression system is really like a combination of things from other games, like Dark Souls, meets Bethesda titles, if anything. So we have a handful of character stats that we will raise every time we level up. When we level up, we gain one attribute point and one skill point. But in order to level up, we can either gain experience from killing things and completing quests, or from increasing our individual skills. So as we perform certain actions, we level up the associated skill, like sneaking, weapon types, etc. These do not directly level you up, but rather each level you gain in a skill provides a certain amount of experience when it happens. And then, as you kill things and complete quests, you gain the bulk of your experience. Now, this makes for an interesting system where a lot of your effectiveness is a combination of a bunch of factors. So those skills do actually matter. As you improve them, you get better at those things. But that's usually combined in some way with that skill's governing attribute. Like for instance, if you want to be a magic caster, you want the main magic stat, spirituality, but also as you raise your magic skill from using combat magic, that will of course make you better at it as well. And both of those things will kind of increase your damage and make you more effective at it. The same thing with stuff like strength and whatever associated melee ability you happen to be using. What's more though, gear also actually, or at least most of it anyway, requires certain attributes to be at a minimum level in order to get the effect. You can always use equipment regardless of whether or not you meet the requirements, but if you don't meet the requirements, you won't get to use that item's special ability. And that's important because the itemization in this game is really interesting. A lot of items have really great effects. There are sort of sets of gear that all kind of match collectively, but also tend to complement each other in terms of the abilities they do have. And I think the itemization is actually probably one of the best things about this game because you can take like a single item with a cool effect and find an entire way to build around that in combination with the skill trees we're about to get to. So to give an example of that, in my first main playthrough, there was a hammer that I knew was in a certain place because of my early access playtime. So I went and got that hammer and then found a way to make an entire build around it because this hammer has a 20% chance when you hit with it to cause a sort of localized lightning storm where it deals damage to enemies in the vicinity as well. So I paired that with skills that made me super fast, cranking up my attack speed and giving myself some lifesteal on top of all of that via skills as well. So I was wielding this two-handed hammer that did big AoE damage while also hitting very fast and stealing life from everything I hit. And I was able to do all of that literally just because I wanted to build around a single item. But the skill trees are really what facilitate a lot of that. So each individual attribute has a main skill tree, and these include a bunch of different things relevant to that particular attribute. So for instance, strength has things like your weapons, of course. Spirituality is where you're going to go to improve your magic. Practicality has a lot of non-combat stuff like crafting, etc. And every time you level, you get one of these points as well, and then you can put them in any given one. The important thing to remember here, though, is you are not going to get enough skill points to max out everything in these trees. You need to pick and choose the stuff you want rather than trying to grab everything. But I would encourage you to play around with them. You can use things like origin potions, I believe they are called, to reset all of this, so it isn't like a complete lock-in from the moment you start. You can respec. And I think you'd probably get the most out of this if you just experimented a little bit and found something you enjoyed in combination with some items you liked. Now, that is the bulk of progression for the sake of this video. I did want to mention, though, there is some secret stuff I am deliberately not mentioning here that I will likely cover in the 100% review instead. So to make this very clear, there is some more progression systems. I would consider them at least minor spoilers, though. Moving on from there, the gameplay and the world a little bit. So as I mentioned, the game is divided up into 3 large areas: Horns of the South, Kuanacht, and then Forlorn Swords. Each of these is a big open zone you are free to explore as you chase down the main story objective. Now, the interesting thing about how these are presented is that you'll know pretty much immediately what you need to get out of the zone. What you're going to then decide, though, is how you go about getting it. You can take the brute force method, but for obvious reasons, that tends to be a little bit harder. The main quest of the area, if you want to actually do it, will then usually give you a slightly easier avenue, while also leveling up and stuff, of course, in order to get at your main objective. Now, the thing is, though, I would say the main quest usually isn't the main draw of these individual areas. Forlorn Swords has a little less content, as you might expect, as they move to wrap up all the threads in that area, but Horns of the South and Kuanacht are just absolutely packed to the brim with side quests and things to do. It's actually a little overwhelming at times, to be honest. And these range from pretty run-of-the-mill, like, simply completing certain bounties to kill certain individual targets or complete some basic fetch side quests, but some of these are really, really good. In fact, even going just beyond the quest, there's a lot of really fun interactions that aren't listed as quests at all. In particular, to be a little bit vague but also pointed out, one of the things I'm doing in my second playthrough is actually chasing down some hidden stuff that I missed on my first run that I only put the pieces together for afterwards, because nothing tells you about them. You kind of just stumble upon them accidentally if you're playing without guides, like I had to, obviously. In the future, I imagine this will be easier, but I'm pretty sure these things that I'm chasing down will lead to the things that I am missing achievement-wise. So without spoiling anything, there's a ton of just little secrets, little things to explore and find. A lot of areas are packed with useful things, and because they did itemization the way they did, sometimes exploring just random places will net you a unique magical item that has this unique effect, and then suddenly you have a different way to play the game, or you can at least try something new, and I liked that a lot. Now, the game does feature a whole host of systems gameplay-wise, though. There is the basic crafting systems, like I mentioned. You can ride a horse, you can find several, steal one, you can even buy one if you want. They're not wildly necessary, though, because there are a ton of fast travel points around the individual zones, but typically you need to be at a fast travel point to travel to another one, unless you fire up your bonfire and give it some fuel in the form of ethereal cobwebs. These come from dealing with the weird, because one recurring theme around the islands is that they are all shrouded by the weirdness, which is part of what is causing all the problems Avalon is facing, and this manifests as Weird Night, meaning that at nighttime all of this stuff comes out and you have to deal with it. You'll get bombarded at nighttime potentially, but the reward there is unidentified items, which you can identify at your bonfire as well, but also ethereal cobwebs. You're going to use those to fuel your bonfire, which will keep you safe at night from the Weird Night, but also you can use it to then identify all those items you're getting as well. And there's other ways to make that profitable. In fact, running around at nighttime and gathering up resources from the Weird Night creatures is one of the most effective ways to make money in the game. But it adds a certain dangerous element to the nighttime and really plays into the heavy use of lighting that they've got in pretty much all of the different areas of the game. There's also things like fishing, player-owned homes, using the crafting system to upgrade your gear, reduce the weight of it to make sure that you are within optimal dodging range to give you as much movement during combat as possible. But there's a lot of ways to interact with this game is what I'm getting at. And I think if you lean fully into that, it can be a lot of fun, whether you're exploring a shipwreck for some lost cargo, bargaining with the tribes of the Dalriata, or trying to find a way to simply reignite the Menhirs. It's a cool world, there's a lot of cool stuff going on, and I liked exploring here quite a bit. Now, that brings us to combat, though. So this is the type of game, especially with it being an RPG and everything, where what you put into combat is usually going to determine how much you enjoy it. But basically, you've got all your major archetypes, and then utilizing skills and whatnot, you can find unique ways to play that do really fun things. Like, for instance, it's possible to make a super low health crit build, which gets exponentially more powerful the less health you have, which gives obviously a sort of high risk, high reward playstyle. There's your magic setup, your standard melee, your more interesting melee with things like shields often having special effects that make simply using them more interesting. There's also the cube items, or the soul cubes, which you charge by performing some action and then you can activate in combat for special effects, which tends to pair really well with magic in particular, but can certainly be used with melee as well. You can always make the typical stealth archer class if you'd like, but simply put, there's a lot of ways to engage with combat. You just have to find the one you enjoy the most. Now, there are still some general rules, though. You do have a stamina bar, and its existence actually does make the magic side of things typically a bit easier. And this is because the more martially focused stuff uses that stamina to attack, whereas magic users do not. Meaning that they can use all of their magic to focus on dodging, because depending on the weight of the items you have equipped, armor-wise, not weapons, but the armor your character has will affect how optimally you can dodge, or basically how many dodge charges you have before it goes on a cooldown. This means that especially the early game tends to be harder for melee characters because they have to spend that stamina to both dodge and attack, which means you have to be really judicious in how you approach those situations, whereas magic users aren't typically met with those same limitations, which does, in my opinion at least, make them a bit easier to play, especially on the early side. Now, as I've hopefully shown you in the footage already, though, melee characters can get very, very strong. It just takes a little extra work because of the way the stamina system boils down. Now, the flip side of that, though, is that magic users cannot upgrade their equipment the same way, so their spells are actual items you will pick up. They're effectively like scroll pages that you then equip to your particular loadout in that moment. You cannot upgrade those, which means they only scale off of your attributes and stuff, and while they can get very strong, there is simply put a bit of a trade-off there. Now, each spell does come with a light and heavy version. This is really cool for summons. So summons will reserve a portion of your mana bar while they are active, meaning that it reduces your max based on what you summoned. In addition to that though, while you will heavy cast a summon spell to actually summon it, if you light cast that same summon spell while the summon is active, you can then direct it on which enemies to attack, and they're pretty good at holding aggro from other enemies as well, and you can go full summoner if you please, whereas other spells, the light and heavy has more variable effects. For instance, there's basic stuff like a lot of your sort of damage spells will do like a simple light attack, whereas the heavy cast of the version just deals more damage. Some of them are more interesting, like some of the lightning spells will bounce between targets on the heavy cast, some of them become AoEs on a heavy cast, and just that kind of stuff. So while I wouldn't pretend that combat looks especially amazing a lot of the time, there really is a lot of fun ways to engage with it if you set your mind to it, and I think that's the best part of it. I'm still messing around with playstyles, so this is again another area that I think the 100% review will really flesh this part of the review out, but if you don't mind a bit of jank, I think it's a lot of fun. Now, for those wondering about the Steam Deck, I will also cover that in the 100% review. I haven't had time to test it, I've just been a little too busy. It is my understanding that it has been verified on Steam Deck for a little while, so I assume it's probably fine, but I admit I haven't fully tested it myself, so I can't really verify that verification, if you will. But all of that is going to bring us to our positives and negatives before we wrap up this sort of quick little review comparatively. So on the positive side of things, I think Tainted Grail here does choice and consequence really well. I think they have a freedom of approach to both their main story and even a lot of side quests, both in terms of gameplay but also just methods through those quests. And that is really, I think, a lot of the fun of going through this, in addition to just seeing the sights and the atmosphere. And running around these maps and vistas and just finding all of this unique stuff, both in terms of content, things to see, and actual rewards to find, feels really great. But there are some negatives. First and foremost, and by far the biggest, the performance, especially in the back half of the game, leaves a lot to be desired, especially since it sort of interrupts a lot of fun I was having up to that point. But we'll see how noticeable that winds up being for people. Speaking for myself, the first act was really polished, and it wasn't until like sort of the end of the second act I started to notice some fraying at the seams before it kind of turned into a bit of a mess in the third act. Again though, was able to complete the story, no issues. It tended to be side quests having problems, alongside a variety of technical issues like the sound popping in and out. Another sort of negative I want to point out here, though, is that the last area has noticeably less content than the previous two areas, which I can understand, but it's worth noting then that the game also seems to have a lot of systems that are either super basic or almost entirely superfluous. Like you can fish, for example, but there's really not much of a reason to do that because it's usually easier to get fish by just exploring camps and stuff where you can pick up tons of them from all of the containers. You can ride a horse, but it's not really necessary because there's so many fast travel points and things where you don't really need a horse. There's a little section in the first area where you can like set up an area to farm like seeds and things, but you don't really need to do that because food is so abundant. And you have all these little systems that I think I would have happily traded for more content and, a better performing game at the end there, to be sure. And I think a really good example of that is the player houses. There are player houses you can buy. There's a few of them in game, and they usually come with some amenities like, access to your player stash, being able to craft and stuff, but the thing is you can access all of that from directly in town anyway. If anything, the houses tend to be a little more inconvenient because you have to go to their location to access all this stuff, whereas you typically only have to fast travel to the middle of town to access them normally, which is usually faster. So there's some little design decisions like that I think expose the jank of the game and the fact that it's definitely more of a AA production, and those aren't really deal breakers for me personally, but I could see them getting, a little bit annoying, frankly. So something to be aware of for sure. But to draw all of that to a conclusion and wrap this video up so I can get back to trying to finish this game up, Tainted Grail, The Fall of Avalon is launching at $45 US over on Steam, which is honestly, I think, a pretty good deal for what you're getting here. I'm not even done with the game and I've already poured like 60 or so hours into it at the time of this particular recording. I've probably got at least another 30 ahead of me. There's a ton to do, a ton of ways to play, but that does come with the sort of caveat that you gotta watch out for performance interference in the back half that hopefully gets fixed relatively soon, and also a pretty healthy dose of just general Eurojank, as I would say it's probably safe to say that Eurojank pretty much is what this game is, as it's very ambitious, some of the pieces don't quite fit together, and yet in spite of that, it's a lot of fun and I appreciate what they were trying to do here, and if I had to sum it up succinctly, I would call it an unpolished gem. So if that is the kind of thing that appeals to you, then I think this game is well worth your time. If you know what you're getting into, I think there's a ton of fun to be had here, and while I am not done with it, I've thoroughly enjoyed my time with it up to this point, which is where we're going to leave off this particular review. I certainly hope you enjoyed it. If you did, don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, all that YouTube jazz. But regardless of any of that, truly, just thank you so much for watching. I really do appreciate it. May you wander in wisdom and have an amazing day.